Well, now that we've tackled the issue of the drought head on, and everyone can go forward and know that it's not a big issue, I guess. Let's talk to David Walker from Firestone Walker Brewing. We're going to discuss a little bit about his business, not so much about how they're using water, but how they're thinking about distribution going forward. David sells his beer in about 15 states. 80% of his beer, however, is sold here regionally in California and on the West Coast. 20% of his volumes obviously sprinkled throughout what he calls food-forward markets, areas like Chicago, Boston, New York, and Philly. And he's done a pretty amazing job, him and his team, of building a beautifully balanced portfolio of beers from high-end barrel-aged farmhouse and sour beers to the 805, which is just a very, very drinkable beer. I had a couple of them the other night. So we're going to talk a little bit about how he thinks about portfolio structure and distribution strategy.
Can you hear me? Oh, good.
Can hear you loud and clear. Thank you for coming down from L.A. You got a house in L.A. now, or?
No, I do not have a house in LA.
You have a business in LA, though.
I have a shoebox in a derelict building in Venice, but, but
maybe an air mattress.
Yeah, literally.
So let's just kind of start by catching up. Where are you guys today? Where are you guys going to finish up the year? What are we looking at in terms of barrelage, and which brands are performing well?
So, and by the way, this is part of this whole beautiful industry that I hate the most, is the way it's so, it's numbers all the time, numbers. I mean, you pick up these blogs and it's like the American beer industry in the tank, but we still have 2 more selling days in the year to rescue it all. And I mean, it's, so yeah, well, I think we'll crest about 200,000 barrels this year. And that we've had some strong growth the last 3 to 4 years, like a lot of craft brewers. So we're sort of pitching along at about a 40%, 45% growth rate, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. I mean, it stresses everywhere from the bank to the brew house, but it's a huge amount of fun. I mean, be careful what you wish for. I remember years ago, about 15 years ago, I was wandering around an old brewery in the west of London called Fuller's, and I don't know if I'm sure some of you guys have been there. And I'm sort of walking around this campus of buildings that's been plugged together over 100 or so years. And there's this sort of old guy walking one way, sort of, a tweed jacket, an elegantly red nose, and a equally decrepit sort of black Labrador at his heels. And he stopped me and introduced himself, and he was the owner. And he sort of pointed out all the buildings and sort of took me through this sort of story. And I just sort of looked and I thought, man, that's something to be. That's a real dream. And now my partners and I, we walk around Paso Robles and our little piece of the world, and we're beginning to see that. We're beginning to see how that sort of experience can be created. And it's hugely satisfying.
So how'd you get to where you are right now? I mean, did you envision cresting 200,000 barrels and all this growth when you started Firestone?
No.
What's that process been like?
No, we didn't. I mean, we started our brewery in a very dark place. I mean, I think like a lot of people who started breweries 20 years ago, and actually to a certain extent even darker. I mean, we started in the center of California, very rural area. I mean, obviously known for its wine region, but we really had very little connection with the sort of the legacy craft brewers up in the north and the sort of the new contemporary movement coming out of San Diego. So we really had to sort of define our own craft movement. I mean, we wanted to sell our beer in the strawberry fields of Santa Maria and the fancy restaurants of Santa Barbara. And that, to a certain extent, defined who we became. We couldn't find wholesalers, and for the first several years, we just sort of went toe-to-toe with the big brewers, creating an alternative.
So focusing initially on the California region and the Santa Barbara area in your local market, was that the plan from the outset, to focus a majority of your sales regionally. I mean, how did you end up in 15 markets with, you know, small amounts of beer if that was the focus?
Well, you know, beer finds its level, or water finds its level. I mean, I'd like to think that we sort of contrived it in a sort of a Harvard MBA way, but we didn't. None of us have got business degrees at the brewery. We just sort of reacted, and we found a huge simpatico locally, like a lot of breweries here, and that was the lowest hanging fruit. And ultimately, and even today, it's the sweetest beer. It's the sweetest beer you drink. It's the sweetest beer you sell. And so that's become so much a reflex for us to really serve that market, and ultimately sort of draw concentric circles around the brewery, which we've done, and which obviously is reflective in the fact that it's actually 75% in California. I checked the numbers, but yeah, I mean that, you know, and the bulk of that is south of where we are in Paso Robles. I mean, I would say we're still very much a fighting craft brewer up in Northern California, but. You know, several years ago, obviously with the emergence of social media and a platform for our consumers and for people who really wanted to push the envelope of their palate with beer, you know, we were then able to take our beer and really push it into markets that we knew, number one, would look after it. And, you know, because of that platform, we ended up getting a national profile.
Right. But you're not a national brand.
Correct.
You might have a national image, and people might know who you are, but you're not everywhere. And now as you guys look at your own future, how are you thinking about the decisions going forward? Do you hunker down and focus regionally, or do you take that next step, you know, kind of double your efforts in the markets that you've already expanded into and try to grow those volumes and then grow into even more markets? I mean, where's your focus lie?
You know, those are great questions, and questions we ask ourselves all the time. You know, we're in distant markets. We know how incredibly difficult it is to be relevant. And, you know, anyone can take a new series of beers into a market and be well received at a certain level. But, you know, if you really want to dig in and you think that you want to be there for 100 years, you better have a plan. And, you know, we've stumbled into markets, we've moved into markets on purpose, like the major media markets. And, you know, our sense is that's enough to be getting on with. You know, we've talked about this before. I mean, 80% of this country drinks light lagers. And, you know, the message or the branding is essentially sort of refreshment and good times. And although, you know, that's perfectly valid, I mean, our stories are so much richer than that. Our beers are so much richer than that. I mean, the people who make up our community of brewers, the breweries, you can walk into them, you can touch the sides, you can smell the beer, and the talking heads that this industry produces. I mean, they're priceless. And you know, ultimately, our story to the consumer is just so much more relevant. I mean, it was fascinating listening to Andy earlier talking about, you know, what happens if we lose all these tax dollars. I'll swap all those tax dollars for 6,000 kilt-wearing mad craft brewers charging the capital. You know, I mean, these guys are so much more effective than a $20 million pack. Now, I mean, technically, I'm sure the lobbyists in this room would argue against that. But, I mean, I think you know, I'm a great believer that you need a mob to sustain a revolution. And bring it on, 6, 7, 8, 10,000 brewers. Everybody's going to find their place. Not all of them are going to be perfect. Some of them are going to be brilliant, and they're going to be the next chapter. But I don't know how I got off on that rant, but...
This is why I asked you to come, man.
My sense is I feel very happy, a little confused, but very happy about the future.
So when you think about the future, what's going to be your next step? I mean, you guys are at, like I said, at kind of a weird point. I mean, you guys got to grow. Clearly, there's people that are very interested in your brand, both consumers and I'm sure investors. You've got a lot of opportunity on the West Coast. How are you going to navigate that road going forward?
Well, you know, the big questions for us at the moment, and it was, you know, Tom sort of went through it here a second ago. I mean, water's an issue. I mean, we're in the center of California. We're in a sort of diversified water district, but ultimately, it's an issue. And you know, we have like I said, we have a vision of regional brewing. We have a vision on that 80% of lager drinkers. I mean, you know, we love the sort of the niche market that we have with some of our barrel-aged beers and so forth. But our future is moving the you know, the import drinker to drinking great, fresh craft beer. And so if we're going to do that, we need capacity, and we need volume, and we need water. And so we're watching that very hard. Literally, we're praying for rain, just like Tom said. You know, working out how we expand. I mean, if we built a brewery in the East Coast, we'd be shipping it all back to the West Coast. So it doesn't make any sense for us to do that.
But you could develop your markets on the East.
We could, but that's not that easy, as we've noted. I mean, I mean, ultimately, yeah, absolutely, you could. But you know, there's another element to this. There's a whole sort of lifestyle thing. I mean, do you want to spend your life on an airplane going east? Do you want to develop a brewery on the East Coast that you can't wander into on an autumn morning and really feel like the place is working the way you think it should be working? I don't think it's that easy developing multiple plants. And especially the way that we run our breweries, a brewery. If you know, ideally, if we could build our brewery in one place, in one region, that to us is, you know, that's it. That's great.
You talked about the consumer and the 80% of the country still drinking light lagers. What are you guys doing to capture some of that volume and go after it? I mean, how are you speaking to that consumer? What's your strategy for growing the pie and bringing more drinkers into the craft segment?
You know, there's a little bit of branding. There's a little bit of magic branding. And we've sort of been educated recently with a couple of brands that we released, and we sort of realized, you know, actually the consumer is a little bit of a magpie. I mean, if they can see something shiny and interesting, you're going to be drawn to them. I think there's very definitely a flavor profile. I mean, we all love drinking big, sort of two-fisted American IPAs, but, you know, there's a lot of people who don't. And, you know, as much as we sort of ignore it and might want to sort of thump them on the head and say, you know, drink this, I mean, they don't. And so we have to a certain extent, move their way. And that doesn't mean all of a sudden we start, you know, making light lagers. But you know, we need to sort of satisfy what they're looking for.
So how do you get them into your portfolio and then move them through? Because you got a diverse set of offerings.
I know, and there's not a lot of planning to that. That's just, you know, we're just very promiscuous at the brewery. You know, look at our community broader. I mean, obviously the session beers have been the big story of the last 2 years, the session IPAs. And, you know, without question, those are just completely leaning into that solution. And we'll do the same.
So you brought up session. I mean, how big of an opportunity is that segment?
I think it's huge. I mean, you talk about 50,000 barrels, and Andy absolutely laid it out there. I mean, that's happening. I mean, absolutely that's happening. We have to, you know, we have to build out session beers. I mean, we're not going to get to 50,000 barrels making imperial IPAs.
50 million.
Sorry, 50 million barrels making imperial IPAs. So yeah, we have to build out a portfolio with a you know, for a broader palette.
Right.
But that's what we need to do. I mean, that's what's going to bring more folks into our world and understanding who we are and what we're about.
But why does a drinker want to drink an 805 instead of just a Budweiser? Another widely available lager.
You know, actually that's a really good question. I mean, we can argue. I mean, I think it's a much better beer for a lot of reasons. But
you still have to convince the consumer of
yeah,
that.
no, I know. But, you know, to a certain extent, so, you know, but Ben Steinman talks about this broad-based consumer movement in tune with the times. And craft beer is right in the you know, the bullseye of that. And, you know, I think the consumer nowadays, you know, really wants to feel a little different. And, you know, maybe, perhaps, they don't want to, you know, they feel a little bit more different drinking, you know, a session IPA or an 805 than they do drinking the most popular beer in America.
Let's talk a little bit more about the portfolio. So how did you get to the point where you're at now with, I mean, I've said this to you in the past that, you know, I think the balance in your portfolio is just is pretty amazing. I mean, you've taken pretty average craft styles that everybody produces and put your own spin on it. You've, you know, run it out a little further, and you want your consumers to try a barrel-aged offering. You want them to work their way up to Parabola and all these higher ABV beers. And then your strategy with how you sell them is neat too, you know, sprinkling those around the country and seeding these markets with the high-end stuff before you bring your core products out. How did that all come together? Did it just happen? Did you think about it? And how should, you know, some of our folks here today think about their own portfolio structures and their strategies for selling it?
You know, in our case, and it might have something to do with the characters we have in the brew house, the brew house drove our portfolio. And, you know, I always like to say, you know, our roots came out of the wine business. So the way estate wineries are sort of built, you know, the ownership builds the estate, and they create this sort of gestalt of who you are, and then they put these sort of these magicians in the middle, these winemakers, and they really let them, to a certain extent, you know, weave their magic. And you know, obviously in our case, Matt Brynildson, we call him Merlin back at the brewery, and you know, to a certain extent, he drives the portfolio, and he is neatly sort of separated from the sort of commercial elements of what we do, enough so that, you know, he's able to sort of freely relate to what the brewing community wants, what the consumer wants, and what we can do as a brewery. So that tells the story of our, you know, of our portfolio. I mean, we started out with a, you know, partially barrel fermented English pale ale, sort of mimicking the Burton Unions, and you know, we've got several thousand barrels of various forms scattered in various programs. And you know, in the middle, we sort of work through hop forward and you know, dry hop beers. I mean, a whole range of different beers, and it's all a reflection, essentially, of the brewing. I mean, beer culture is really alive in our brewery, and I know that's such an obvious thing to say, and one would hope it's alive in every brewery. But you know, our portfolio is very much driven by our brew team.
So how do you get that message out to the consumer so that they're connecting, you know, with that idea that these are the brewers driving it? I think. How do you tell their story?
I think the consumer sort of gets it to a certain extent. I think obviously, as we want to expand our brewery, then maybe we need to start sort of articulating that message. But you know, this goes back to this broad-based consumer movement. You know, I think the reason why things like this happen is the world's different nowadays. There's a platform for these things to get out somewhat through osmosis, and we don't need to take out a giant ad in the LA Times to tell people that, you know, there's beer culture at the Firestone Walker Brewing Company.
But billboards are good.
Billboards are good for 805, yeah, absolutely. And the, I mean, that, you know, that piece I'm not that worried about. I mean, I feel that I feel it just sort of happens.
Interesting. We've got a couple questions that have come in here. How do you deal with all the, you know, the increasing competition in your local market?
Well, to a certain extent, 805 was actually a reaction to that, because we want to remind people, hang on a second, we're local. I mean, it wasn't genius; it had been done before, and you know, the consumer ran with it. But like I said, you know, as much as we all hate competition, I mean, I mean, it's you know, no one likes, you know, their best laid plans to be sort of moved. But I think all in all I can tell you is that our growth is directly proportional to the amount of brewers there are in America. And I think, you know, I can't figure out why that is, but I just know it's good. You know, competition is great. Bring it on. It actually makes us better. It broadens the conversation. And as we know, the conversation, I mean, you know, we tend to get wrapped around the axle about how important we all are. And the fact is, most of the world doesn't know who the hell we are. And otherwise, you know, the share that we would have would be different. So I think we need several thousand voices out there touching their communities and their people and their friends and saying, hey, try this. What do you think?
Doesn't that make it much harder for you to sell beer and to keep lines?
Well, no, I mean, that's the point.
Do the day-to-day stuff?
That's the point I'm making, is it hasn't.
Huh.
I mean, okay, it's made it impossible to hold a handle for a while in certain bars, but the fact is, you have to go back and say, okay, why is Lagunitas on fire? Why is Green Flash doing so well? Why are we up 40%? Why is Stone building breweries on the East Coast? And I mean, they're feeling the same competition that we are. And I think it's because consumers are cottoning on to what we're doing. I mean, obviously there's an arc to that. At some point things change, but I mean, I don't think I'm going to see that.
So 10,000 breweries, that's a realistic future for you?
It's a lot of breweries. But, you got to go back. I mean, you also got to go back and look at how many breweries that are out there that are, I mean, sadly, the breweries at that point start segmenting themselves into sort of real production breweries and brew pubs and so forth. But I have no problem with the pace of breweries coming online in this country.
So speaking on that segmentation, I mean, how do you see just the market developing in general in terms of the kinds of businesses that are out there? I mean, we saw the stat from Lester earlier about the top 50 and what it took to be in the top 50 in 2007 versus 2013. And, volumes have grown considerably to get there, from 14,000 to 50,000 just to be in the BA top 50. So how does that top 50 look for you in, 5 years? And what do all the other breweries underneath them look like?
Well, hopefully the top 50 shoulder the load of educating the 80%. And they start sort of reinventing themselves and doing some of the things that Andy outlined, getting smart about the way that they go to market, and sort of standing up and looking after the industry as a whole. And, others will step into their place and the thing will keep moving forward. I think it's a living, organic thing at the moment. And it doesn't, we take a snapshot and sort of freak out about the snapshot, but things are moving up and moving out. When we entered this industry, Fritz Maytag was God, and he still is a fabulous guy. But he sort of quietly exited stage left 2-3 years ago. Brewery is still alive, and other characters filled in his shoes, and that's a circle of life. Right. And hopefully, as long as a community we stay authentic to beer culture and what we're trying to do, and consumers are still interested in stories and what we're about, this thing will stay really healthy, I think.
You mentioned sort of Fritz exiting, which is a good springboard for this question on all the deal activity. There are brewers out there considering exits of their own. And some who have already, exercised the ability to exit. Where do you feel this activity will trend? Where are you guys as a brand right now? Are you guys thinking about this stuff? And if so, I mean, I know when we spoke, you said it was a buy, sell, or grow mentality. So how do you guys think about, at the time that you need to leave, what you do?
I mean, I think it's a hugely personal thing. I mean, you look at Fritz, he just got tired. Maybe, I'm not tired of life, he just got probably tired of the brewery. I don't know. I mean, I really don't know Fritz that well. But there's so many different things that drive these decisions. You might have breweries that started out with a bunch of partners, and 2 of them are activists and they want out, and 2 want to stay in. I mean, you might have people who just always dreamed about, making a home run. Someone might just say, you know what, I'm done standing up in Total Wine talking about my beer. I want to go sail a boat around the world. There are so many things that sort of fold into that decision. I think without question you'll see consolidation. But like I said, there's this movement of breweries that will fill in those slots if those breweries fail in their next chapter. So yeah, I mean, I think it's somewhat naive to think that the craft brewing community is going to sort of defy gravity of economics. But on the other hand, it will delay it because it's fun. I mean, everybody here loves what they do. I mean, we can't hold a grudge with each other for more than a couple of minutes. We go have a beer. You know, 300-pound men hug it out on a regular basis, and there's no sexual harassment around. I mean, this is a great place to be, and it's not easy to leave. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges for people wanting to get in, who want to sort of, you know, they don't want to come in and start at the beginning, earn their spurs, and become part of the gang. They want to sort of buy into the gang. I mean, it's going to be expensive and it's going to be difficult for people. But like I said, I think that this industry will evolve and mature just like most others.
So for Firestone, are you buying, selling, growing?
We're going to buy Anheuser-Busch next week.
Yeah. So. Awesome, man. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Cheers. Cheers.